Hi, my name is Jay Bazuzi. I'm a developer on the Visual C++ debugger team. What we're going to be talking about today is what's going new into the Visual Studio debugger. There's still some people trickling in, but they get to miss the intro. So the big thing that's new in our debugger this time around is we have one debugger for all of the languages in Visual Studio. We'll be talking a little bit more about that later. Also, we're going to talk about what's new in the UI, what's new for former users of Visual C++, and what's new for former users of Visual Basic. But first, I'd like to make a note about what I think of animations in slides. That's the last one you'll see. In Visual Studio, you can now debug multiple programs at the same time. They can be written in multiple languages, and they can be running on multiple machines. You can do this with native C++, with managed C++, SQL stored procs, JavaScript, and VBScript. And later on, I'll be showing you some debugging of both Visual Basic and C# at the same time. So on to the UI. If you see this, tell me I'm on the wrong display. All right, that's better. I've written a simple app. If you write software like this, come by. I've got a resume. I'd like to talk about your company. So let's just debug this here. So the first thing I really want to show off for all you VC users is the new Threads window. It's not modal. You don't have to cancel it to get back to the debugger. There are other improvements too, though. It's okay. We now have two columns in here, name and location. One of them does a much smarter job of figuring out which procedure your thread is currently in. The other one is the name of the thread start procedure. So you can figure out which thread you're looking at instead of just having a bunch of random hex garbage. Those of you who use QuickWatch, let's just something simple since we don't have a choice here. It's resizable. And while we're at it, maximizable. We've got some all new exceptions UI. Groups exceptions, because we now support a lot more types. If you do C++ exception handling, you don't have to use the single Microsoft C++ Win32 exception. You can now add your own exceptions to the list. We give you a few by default. All of the recently misnamed COM+ runtime exceptions are listed here as well. And then there's some stuff that we did in VC6 with the compiler so that in debug we can generate runtime checks for your code. This time around, we've enhanced the list of checks, made them work better, and they're listed here as well. For more information on those, you should probably go check out docs when the time comes. These are really great things. They do stuff like verify that your stack variables get actually initialized before you use them, but it does it at runtime. We've got an all-new breakpoints UI. Those of you in VB will be surprised to see that there's any breakpoints UI at all, and the breakpoints are now persisted. In any case, it's dockable. We've done the same thing as we did with threads. And we can also set breakpoints in the margin even in VC and get tooltips for them. Some of you like command line debugging. We don't have a command line UI. We do have a command window. We've produced a set of aliases for NTSD style commands, so those of you who use NTSD will feel quite at home. For example, KB to dump a stack. We don't support all NTSD style commands, but thanks to our greatly improved automation model, you can add new commands for things that you'd like to see. For example, the $kb command, which dumps all stacks across all threads, can be implemented. We've actually done this back at the office just to prove that it was true. We also have improved the modules window slightly. In 6.0, the modules window was new. It was another modal dialog. Today, it's dockable. Of course, you can go and sort by path, find out where your DLLs are loaded from to make sure that none were loaded from some other installation of the product, perhaps. There's other data in there, version numbering, that sort of thing. Set next statement, you can drag the glyph. I'll go ahead and show you. This is a bad idea at this point, and it tells us. And we support attach and detach, both in native C++ and VB and other languages. The disassembly window is still around, not largely changed, but now, even in managed languages, you can see x86 assembly for your code. This is, of course, the JIT compiled code that you get to see. Memory window, an old favorite. You get 4 of them. You might ask, why 4? Well, CodeView had 2, and we had to be better. So we did 4. And we've also improved our support for Unicode in the debugger top to bottom. If you have Unicode strings that are mixing multiple stuff, things that would be multiple code pages otherwise, you can now look at them and watch and edit characters and all this sort of thing, just like you'd expect to. A number of manufacturers of CPUs have come out with new register sets and new instruction sets to support 3D graphics programming and that sort of thing. In registers, we can now look at all of those register types. We group them now because there's a lot of them. And we support AMD's 3D Now and Intel's MMX and SSE. Anybody who's ever worked on a machine that doesn't have a debugger has probably seen Dr. Watson at some point, generating for you a crash dump. These are similar to unit-style core dumps. Well, now VS can read those crash dumps and we can write them. And the old additional DLLs dialog that you may be familiar with, this is a dialog in the project settings of VC. It allows you to list DLLs to be preloaded by the debugger. That is, we would go preload the symbols when you started debugging so that even if the DLL wasn't loaded at launch time, you could still set breakpoints in those DLLs. That dialog is gone. Now you set your breakpoint when the DLL gets loaded, we set it in code. We've improved our support for long symbols. In the past, you had a 255-character limit on the length of a symbol string. This is because we prefixed them with only 1 byte. It used to be 127, so it was greatly improved when we got it to 255. But now, as far as we know, there is no limit. No hard-coded limit, at least. We'll find an actual limit in time, I'm sure. We've improved support for 2 particular types, hresult and wchar pointers. In the past, the compiler would always take all typedef types and resolve them back to base type. So an hresult would come back as an unsigned long. And if you looked at an hresult in the watch window, you would just get a numeric value. In VC6, we added the --HR format specifier. And so if I put 0, --HR in watch, it shows me SOK. That was a good start. But we got the compiler team to agree to actually emit hresult as a type. So now, if well, let's start with efail. We recognize efail as a name. It resolves to efail. Great. We say format that as hex. That's the hex value of efail. Let's type that in. That's what you're used to seeing when you look at hresult. And of course, the 6.0 way was to use --HR, shows up as efail. But now, you can cast, because we recognize it as a type. This means if you have an hresult type variable, it'll show up correctly. And if you step out of a function that returns an H result, the return value will show up correctly as a symbolic H result value. Similarly, we recognized wide character pointers. So there's no more display Unicode string checkbox. We don't automatically have to take every unsigned short and turn it into a string. We now can recognize an actual type. A couple things. The last 3 bullets on this slide, for those of you following along at home, are things that existed in VC6 and weren't documented then. They exist in VC7, and they continue not to be documented. But we thought you guys might enjoy them. The first one is the @CLK register. This is a pseudo register that we use to display a timer internal to the debugger. Those of you who have seen my previous debugger talks will know about this. You add 2 watches @clock equals 0 and @clock, and every time you step, the second one will show how long your step took. There's @error, which shows you the result of what getLastError would give you, right? So for system APIs, for DRT APIs. This has always been an H result. You can, in the past, it would tell you to use COM-HR, but again, you can cast to H results if you type it correctly. Or maybe you can't, excuse me. It helps if your caps lock key is off. And finally, the @tib, which is the pointer to the beginning of NT's thread information block. Not much is known about the thread information block. What is known has been published by one of the fine authors in an MSJ, and now I can't remember his name. By Matt Petrie. You can stand, he'll answer questions about tib later, I'm sure. So on to VB stuff. The debugger is now out of process from your application. This follows the same model as VC. It's a big change for VB. This allows us to do a lot of stuff to make VC and VB debugging a lot more similar. All of the UI you've seen so far, remember, is available in both VB and VC and all the other languages that we support. We can do attach, and we can do detach in VB. And now that we've got multi-threaded application capabilities in VB, you can do multi-threaded debugging. And now that VB has exception handling, you can do the appropriate things for debugging exceptions. Edit and continue has been enhanced in VB. You can now add new function signatures and change existing signatures. And of course, we support interoperability between VB and the other programming languages out there. I'm glad at least one person enjoys that. And now the big grocer-to-go demo. Some of you hopefully got breakfast, but if you didn't, you can look. This thing is confusing. There's a lot of buttons. No. All right, very good. All right. I keep telling them they should give me a faster laptop because you guys have to wait while this thing does stuff like load projects. See what I mean? Put this on my feedback. Give Jay a faster laptop. That's not an option. We can't make the code any faster. The sleeps are mandatory. So this is a simple 3-tiered web app type project. On the front end, we've got some controls written in VB. The middle tier is some C#, and the back end is SQL. We've built the whole thing in Visual Studio. You can see the project mouse pointer. You can see the here with all different components of our app, and the Server Explorer pointing to the SQL server, which is this laptop. it's so this web app is something to order groceries online. We have milk and cereal and soda. The guy across the hall from me loves to eat cereal, so this is perfect for him. So what we're going to do is attach to the app. You might be asking which part of the app we're attaching to. We're getting the whole thing. Attach dialog, you get to choose which programs you want to attach to. In this case, we're choosing the recently misnamed COMPLUS and SQL. See what I mean? Look at this. Who writes this stuff? So I've got some breakpoints already set. It's a canned demo, right? So just do a refresh on the page and we get to hit the first one. This is in the web form in the VB stuff. I'm going to skip past this one and show here we're about to call into market. Market is the C# object. Remember that we're still in VB, which is on the client, and we're talking to the server at this point in the next call. I'm going to go ahead and run past that, and now hit a breakpoint in the C#. The interesting thing to do at this point is to bring up your call stack, and note that the C# and the BASIC are both shown. We get a merged call stack across these languages. This is the model of multi-language debugging in VS7. So let's continue. At this point, we're creating some ADO stuff. So talk to the server, to the SQL server on the back, right? And now we create our data set. A data set's going to call in. We're going to hit a sort proc in there. I've already got a breakpoint waiting for me, luckily. And now you can see some SQL. This is all in one debugger. We didn't have to attach to anything else. We didn't have to launch any separate debugger. We're done. And then at this point, I'm going to detach and exit. And IE is still running. Let's go ahead and buy some milk. This is Funny Farms milk. It's where I get my sense of humor. And just to be daring, I'm going to try to reattach. Just to prove that at least we've got the UI in place to make it work, right? Oh, back to the slides. Somebody just suggested that I hit debug. I'm going to quietly do that and see what happens. Actually, I can show you that because it's a little bit interesting. We've changed the way that JIT debugging works. So you can now choose between multiple debuggers on the machine. So if you have MS-Dev6 on there and VS7, you have the ability to select which debugger you want to use. Question is, can we add more? I'm really not familiar with the mechanism that we use to add more to this, but at the very least, if you're CSIP, I'm sure you could. Come by afterwards, we'll talk about it a little more. What I'm doing at this point is I'm quietly playing with this machine and see what else we come up with following down this path. This is easily the most interesting slide in my talk. So pay very close attention, add notes. So I went ahead and attached. I don't know where this is going. This is ad hoc at this point. Please play along, hope that everything works, that sort of stuff. So we have no symbols, which is good because then you'd know what our code did. But it worked. We managed to attach to it. Oh, you know what I should have shown you to be perfect at this point? We've attached, we don't have any symbols. This is because I didn't install them, but maybe I'm a tester that forgot to install. So if you go into the modules window now and pick a DLL, say the one that we're looking at right now, MSNV. So if we can find it. There we go. This MSENV DLL, we don't have symbols for it. We now have the ability to reload symbols. Now you can go and point to the PDB that's been missing. And if you point to the wrong one, you can try again. See, aren't you glad it crashed? I would have forgotten to show that entirely. I'll show you the next slide, and then you guys have to figure out what you want to do. It's the last one. So we've got about 45 minutes for Q&A. I guess the talk went a little faster than I expected. If there's more stuff that you guys want to see, let me know. I'd be glad to show it off, except for the crashing part. That we don't do again. So if you got questions, there's lots of mics, too. It's plenty.
If I have a just-in-time exception, or can I do just-in-time debugging on a remote machine?
The question is, can you do just-in-time debugging on the remote? So when you're remote debugging, you can do a remote attach now, which is the next best thing. Unfortunately, getting a remote notification that the other side has crashed is kind of hard. But we can remote attach, which is all.
Even after a GPF?
Even after a crash. We can do that in, what's our support for non-native remote attach? Nothing in this particular image of the products, but hopefully later.
Interestingly enough, does the attach and detach of the debugger work? I mean, which operating systems does that work in? Is it all supported platforms?
The question is, where do we support attach and detach? For native in particular, we only support detach on NT and Windows 2000 using the proxy service. Some of you have found the proxy service in your own exploration.
So you no longer use the old debugging functions to debug a process?
Actually, so the way we implement this is we use the same debugging APIs, but we implement a proxy debugger in a separate process that the IDE talks to. And so the IDE can exit, leaving the proxy in place.
I see. Okay, so the proxy is sticking around because, it's my understanding, you couldn't stop debugging.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
When you step across into a web method, what kind of security do I have a web service provider to prevent somebody from remotely debugging into my web service?
You have the security that you would expect based on your privileges as a user. Right, we've implemented a correct security model, if you will.
Do you have any plans to integrate WinBug with this environment?
The question is, would we implement WinDBG with this IDE? Why on earth would we want their UI in ours? There's a rivalry forming at Microsoft between these two debuggers, which means that no, we'll never touch their code.
And one last thing, do you have any plans to document those undocumented features?
That's a tough one. Well, I just put them in the slide. Is that good enough? Some of those we hope to eventually expose more and add more to them in similar nature.
White paper would be best area to explore, I guess.
It's worth considering.
When you're debugging managed code, is there any way to step through the IL?
So you can read the IL.
Right, but I mean, because you show you can drop down to the x86, but
Right.
in this environment, it may be much more useful to be stepping through the IL.
Can't do that. We actually show you the x86, which is also useful, right?
Yeah,
To see what you're getting.
Right.
But if you want to actually look at the IL, your best bet is you can get an IL dump.
You can't step through it, though. I mean,
That's right.
The issue. Is there any plans to add that?
Not this time around.
In another talk, there was a tool called userdump.exe, and it seemed to take a live system dump and not touch the process. I don't know if this is a Windows 1000 feature, but is there an API behind that developers can use?
So is there an API behind userdump?
Yeah,
I don't think we exposed that today.
Okay.
Perhaps in the future. But right now, your best bet is to go through either userdump or VS.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
I don't know if this is directly a Dev Studio problem or an NT problem, but one source of constant pain for us is the ability to single step on an SMP machine. Has anything been done to fix that?
There's a problem single stepping on SMP machines?
Oh, you do it enough, it just locks up.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, all of our machines are now SMP, and so you're more likely to have problems single stepping on single proc machines.
One more question. Dump files, they tend to be huge, right? So you got a 128 machine, it's a huge dump. Are there any tools to kind of compress the dump so that, someone in the field can like take it and email it back to me that's only like, 100K or
How
something?
about a zip?
Yeah, but like somehow like reducing all the stuff I don't need like for my app or
There's nothing around to process it to move extraneous data other than things that take lots of zeros and make them just one.
Thanks.
This is actually a funny question since you mentioned it earlier. I've noticed all the demos have been very sluggish on these machines. How fast is that laptop of yours?
This laptop is a 486.
Are you kidding?
Yes.
Thank you.
Have any more?
Seriously, I do want to know how fast the machine is. It is important to me.
It's not mine, which is why I don't know off the top of my head.
I mean, is it a Pentium 3, Pentium 2?
It's a Pentium 2.
Close enough.
It's a Tegra 8000. Anybody know? What does that tell you? It's a stepping 10. It only has 196 mega RAM, though. If you yell, I can't hear you. Try a mic.
I've got one for you. You referred to user dump, which I hadn't heard about before. Is that a non-diagnostic, a non-destructive user process dump?
I don't really know about user dump because I haven't used it. But the ability to write crash dumps in VS is non-destructive. Although you have to attach it as a debugger, but we do have the ability to use dumps as you go. This is kind of nice, right, for taking snapshots of your state to figure out what's going on.
Right, that's precisely the problem. Quite often what happens with an app is, if it's really smart, it knows something bad is happening, but doesn't really know what went wrong. It would be nice to take a state dump at a client site and ship it back.
Right.
So I just wonder whether there was any non-destructive dump mechanism. Usually, you take a fault, you recover from the fault, but you would really like to take a snapshot. Right now, we write code to produce that snapshot. Is there an alternative?
So it's certainly possible, right? There are apps written today that do that. I just don't know how much of that we expose to the public on how to do that just yet.
Okay.
I'm sure we will eventually.
All right, thanks.
And my question follows up on that. So the format, is it just a binary format? Is it visual in nature? Is it
A dump file?
Oh, a dump file. Is this just a Dr. Watson log? You said that, but I'm assuming you meant just like it, not the same.
We support Dr. Watson style dumps, although Dr. Watson actually has bugs in the way that it writes the dumps that we don't have. We have all different bugs. Right?
Okay.
Good. So it's primarily an image of your mapped memory, right? Okay. Plus some additional information. The details of it are, as far as I know, proprietary, but it's what you'd expect from a dump, right?
So the only way you can produce one of these is to be in the debugger and save it. Or what other program you said that can generate it?
There's a userdump.exe, and I don't know where it comes from. I've just seen it around. It's in the platform SDK, actually. Light bulb.
Is that a new SDK or the current SDK?
It's in the Windows 2000 SDK.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
In the threads window, you were showing the name of the top-level function. If I have my own wrapper function, can I exclude that from the list and have it just continue to walk the stack to the next function?
So, questions about the name of the threads. Okay, I'm not going to show that. So, you're talking about the name or the location field? The location is the one that uses the topmost frame?
Yeah, the name.
The name of the thread is chosen from the bottommost frame, depending on which way you count your stack. Right? The name.
So if I do begin thread EX, is it going to just show begin thread EX or the next function after that?
It's not going to show begin thread EX. It's going to show the actual named entry point thread. The equivalent of the WinProc, right? I forget what. It's what you pass to create thread.
So that would begin. Okay. Is there any way to skip over that if I have my own kind of wrapper underneath?
If you compile with no symbols for it, for that particular version, then yeah.
And also in the threads window, is there any way to add like watches so I can get a list of all the threads? If I have a thread local storage variable, and just add that into as one of the columns.
I didn't quite follow what you said, but
I
don't think so.
If I have a thread local storage variable, it'd be nice in the threads window to kind of get a list of the value for each of the threads.
Thread. That's an interesting idea, but no.
Thanks.
But now with the new UI, right, if you put that variable in watch and cycle between the threads, you get to see it update for each thread, and it's easier to make that cycle because we don't have the whole modal dialog. You just double-click on each one as you go.
If you guys put kernel mode debugging into your debugger, war will be over. You'll sink windbag with red torpedo. What are your plans on those lines?
Our plans are not to do it yet. No kernel mode debugging this time around. Who knows about the future?
All right.
I had a question, but I also wanted to ask something about threads. Are you going to be able to resume suspended threads now from the thread window?
This question is, can you resume suspended threads? Actually, we've done extra work to prevent you from doing that. Because in the past, you could suspend and resume threads to some extent using the threads UI. And we used the same thread suspend counter as the OS. And we decided that this was actually going to be very confusing. And this time around, we've got two different notions. There's the question of what the suspend count is on the thread according to Win32. And then there's also the question of whether the user via the debugger is asked to suspend the thread. And we give that a different name. We call that freezing and thawing a thread. They're actually completely distinct. So any ability you had to do that in the past is now completely removed.
And the main question was, is there any additional support for debugging COM components? Like, can you, if you have an out-of-proc server, can you debug the client and the server in the same debugger now?
So yeah, you can. That's one of the big things that we've fixed up this time around. The sample that I was showing earlier, the grocer to go, is actually in 3 processes. None of those were native debugging, but yeah, you can debug native across multiple processes all in one debugger.
Hello. Is it possible to put a breakpoint for a specific thread? If I have code that is shared by multiple threads, I want break only for one thread in this at this point.
Not yet. Not this time. But if you have any questions that I don't want to answer, you should ask him. So what you do have the ability to do this time is to use the automation model to implement that sort of thing, right? And you can actually do a whole lot more there. It's a little more involved than just a little bit of preformed UI, but you can now set a breakpoint that only fires on a given thread with a given whatever else you want. Right? I mean, you've got a lot more flexibility. The automation model in previous versions of VC was quite limited. This time in VS, it's much more complete.
Thank you.
I missed the beginning of the talk, but does vStudio now have the ability to debug crash dumps? I heard some discussion about user.dmp.
To debug what?
Crash dumps like WinDBG. We can open up a crash dump and view it, or is that strictly WinDBG?
We do have the ability to read crash dumps now.
Oh, okay.
For those of you who missed the beginning of the talk, there it is.
A couple more questions. Is there any chance there's a source for the common language runtime, or maybe it's not even that, the base class libraries like system.string or whatever it is?
You're asking if you get the source for it?
Yeah.
If you get the source for it. This isn't a debugging question per se, you know. So I wouldn't know.
Anything?
I don't know how much of that we publish in source form. Sam, do you know?
Okay. One more question. So right now I have this nasty image help code to get a stack trace in a process, which I probably lifted from someone off the net. And it's horrible and messy, and it doesn't work all the time. Maybe that's my fault. But is there built-in support for that? Like, you know, I've hit an exception, and I just want to dump the stack and then exit or log it or anything.
So there's now something called DBG help in Windows 2000, and it's Win2K only, but it's really an improved version of image help. I don't know how much it improves that situation, but I know that that's one of the things that we'd like to make better. Image help and DBG help I don't come from the debugger team or even from anywhere in Visual Studio. They come from the OS, right?
In line with call stack tracing across multiple languages, does this mean that you can actually, the call stack will trace all the way back to an ASP invocation of something that actually caused an error later on in the...
Poor Sam. So we're talking about between the ASP stuff
so
and...
the ASP, the call to COM object, and the bug occurred down in the COM object. A lot of times then when you try to trace back, you end up someplace in, bang ASP, some number assembly code, but you never get back the actual ASP source code that was the source of the original invocation.
You're talking about having written some script on the client?
Yes, right.
I don't think we'll get you that in particular, but it's worth playing around with. There's some times when we can and sometimes when we can't, right?
What do you have to enable or install on SQL Server or IIS to remotely debug stored procedures and server-side objects?
How do you install it? This is a
Well,
demo.
you had to have
don't
the front
install anything.
page extensions on IIS with 6.0.
So there's the XSP stuff, right? I mean, what we're showing here is XP in particular. And there's a portion that we install on the middle tier. I don't know how much you have to install for ASP. Here comes Sam.
So one of the things we've done in Visual Studio Setup is added a server-side setup, which is purely for the server, and that will include all the DLLs you need for debugging on there, if that actually answers the question.
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
Thank you.
You have a support for debugging multiple processes in the debugger, the same debugger.
Say that again.
You added the support to debug multiple processes in the same instance of the debugger. Can I debug one process using, say, remote debugging, and say other, say 2, 3 using on the local one, using the same instance?
There's two situations here. Are you talking about using one debugger to debug something on this machine and something on a different machine, or are you talking about both programs running here and 2 debuggers?
No. Yeah, the first one. Yeah.
Yes, you can do that. You can debug across multiple machines. So if I've got a client-side something running on my laptop here and on the remote, which is also my laptop today. But yeah, you can do exactly that.
Perfect. Thank you.
I think somebody else asked this question. I don't know if you understood from the question. Right now in the C runtime, you get total source. You can step right through it. A lot of, the extremely rare occasion that there's something wrong with the runtime. Never happens, I know. It's always my problem. But it seems now with .NET there's a larger runtime. And I guess you might not be the right person, but is there going to be some source code with that, especially in things like mundane things like string classes and stuff like that, which historically it's very nice to step into to see what you did or what you didn't do.
You're right in saying that I'm not the right person.
Okay. Is anybody in the room the right person?
Okay, we've got I'm pretty sure that you get all the source. I think I'd believe him. Okay.
I couldn't hear that.
For the class libraries, it's likely we got here. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a safe bet.
The question is related to the undocumented no step into feature. First, is it still available in VisualStudio.net?
To the which feature?
No step into.
This question is the no step into feature. It's still there, but it's completely different. Okay. It's a lot more powerful and a little bit more complicated to use. It's no longer in AutoExp. It's now in the registry.
Does it support templates better?
It supports regular expressions for your functions.
Oh, great. Thanks.
Can you describe that trick you were talking about with @clock to measure how long a step takes? How do you do that? You said you did in previous talks.
Okay, so the reason I didn't actually show you how to do that is because in this particular build, it doesn't work. And I only found that out on Wednesday. And I didn't want to patch the thing to get that fixed. It'll be fixed by Monday, but that doesn't do you any good. Yes, and you can do it in VS6. So the way it's, you can go ahead and type in the stuff, and you can just ignore the error messages. All right. So you add 2 watches. One of them is @CLK equals 0, and the other one is @CLK. Ignore the errors, right? What happens is the first one sets the value to 0, and then the second one displays what @clock is. But when you do a step, because of the order of our evaluation, we'll show you the value of this register, and then we'll reset it. Pseudo register, excuse me. And so every time you step, we'll get the time in nanoseconds of the step in the second entry. Keep in mind that there's a lot of debugger overhead, so if the numbers that you're looking at are like 1,000 or smaller, you really should ignore them, which is why I wonder why we use nanoseconds, right? Because if we're throwing away numbers smaller than 1,000, you should go up by 1,000. But that's right, it only counts execution time for the app. Okay, that's almost entirely true. We skip over, we include time for debug event handling by the debugger. The one thing I would recommend that you do is just go ahead and divide by 1,000 in the second number, This would look much cooler if it was working, trust me. Then you move up an order, 3 orders, right? So you get a more useful number.
Hi, we tend to do a lot of work with services, and they typically are difficult to debug because when you have a crash and you try to bring up the debugger, sometimes it doesn't work. You have to go and change it, say interact with desktop and that sort of thing. I wonder if you guys run in that mode, or do much testing with your debugger when you're testing on processes that are services.
So JIT debugging a service is particularly difficult to do, right? We do actually have even more service debugging to do because there are 2 services that we include with this product. So if your question is, are we going to do it often enough to make it easy for you, well, we're doing it pretty often these days. One of the things to keep in mind is we actually had somebody try this last night. You can now detach from a service if you're using the proxy in native, which is often important for a service, right? So you let it continue to run.
Will you still have to do set the service to interact with desktop in order to debug it, or?
We don't.
Okay.
Well, we don't normally do that, right? So if it's working, then great.
Okay, thanks.
More questions? No. So at this point, I'd like to ask you guys to come up here and ask me interactive questions. Keep in mind that it's about 6 a.m. for me still, so be gentle.